Grandview-Woodland is a neighbourhood full of character and diversity. From Clark to Nanaimo and from Broadway to the ports, the area presents an eclectic mix of people, places, and stories. Its location just east of downtown offers residents easy access to the city, as well as other parts of Vancouver and the region by way of major roads and transit. First Nations identified the foot of today's Victoria Drive as Haifike, the Squamish word for cedar tree. Today, 1 in 10 Grandview-Woodland residents identify as Aboriginal or Métis. The first European settlers arrived in the mid-1800s. Early preemptions along Burrard Inlet created district lots 182 and 183 and were purchased by Victoria-based politicians. Much of today's Grandview became part of the Hastings Mill timberlands in the 1870s. The company built a flume from Trout Lake to the mill at the foot of today's Dunlevy Street to provide water for the mill's boilers. In the 1890s, much of the southern slope of Burrard Inlet was taken up by industry. At Cedar Cove, the Columbia Brewery opened its doors in 1892. Thomas Kirkpatrick's Cedar Cove Mill opened a couple years later, followed by the E.H. Heaps Mill, McNair's Hastings Shingle Mill, and a slaughterhouse. By the end of the 1890s, Cedar Cove had its own store and post office operated by William Seidelman. E.J. Clark donated land at 15th Avenue to the city as a park in an attempt to create interest in his land. The interurban line opened to traffic in 1891, and a few years later, Park Drive was built alongside the tracks and took its name since it ended at Clark Park. The street was renamed Commercial Drive in 1912 by merchants who felt the name was better suited to attracting business. A portion of 9th Avenue was renamed Broadway at the same time. A hand-painted sign nailed up at the interurban stop at First and Commercial in 1892 simply said, Grandview. The water system arrival in 1904, the same year local streetcar service was begun by the BC Electric Railway, heralded development in the area. By the First World War, the business district around Commercial and First was thriving with apartment buildings, stores, banks, and a local movie theatre. Development was an eclectic mix of small houses side by side with larger estate-like properties such as Professor Odlum's turreted house just off Commercial Drive on Grant Street. The area between Venables and First Avenue and centered around Victoria Drive was promoted by real estate interests as a desirable district for larger homes. While several were built along the ridge, the opening of Shaughnessy put an end to the venture. The construction of the Burnaby Lake Line in 1912 along First Avenue helped spur further development in the area. Builders filled in the streets with pattern book houses built on spec for rental and for sale. The Alcazar Theatre opened in 1913 at Commercial and East Georgia. Later, home of the Vancouver Little Theatre and finally known as the York. The Grandview opened in 1912 at Commercial near First Avenue. Later replaced by the newer theater in 1922. The Rio opened on Broadway in 1938. The Grandview Cut, created by the Great Northern Railway in 1913 to bring trains in on a level track into the new freight yards on the former False Creek Basin, cut the neighborhood in half. Schools followed the new development in the area. McDonald School at Hastings in Victoria opened its current building in 1906. Britannia opened in 1908 and moved to its present location in 1910. Grandview opened at First and Commercial in 1905 and then at its current location in 1926. Templeton High School opened in 1927. The Franciscan Church and Friary at Napier and Semlin occupies the former estate occupied by William Miller from 1908 until the early 1920s. His brother J.J. Miller built a house on Salisbury at Napier called Currajong. The Vancouver Gas Company had a facility at 2nd and Woodland which featured 2 towering gas tanks for storage. Grandview Lanes opened in 1947 and today has one of the last remaining neon ceilings in the city. In 1973, the Vancouver East Cultural Centre opens its doors in the old Grandview Methodist Church. The western slope below Commercial Drive was zoned for apartments in the 1930s, though the majority of the apartments were not built until the 1960s and 70s. In the 1980s, a number of co-ops were built along the slope. In 1985, SkyTrain arrived in the area with the construction of the Expo Line and station at Broadway and Commercial. In 2002, the Millennium Line opened and the Commercial Drive station became a significant hub where the 2 lines met. Commercial Drive, or the Drive as it's sometimes called, is a bustling street full of eclectic shops, businesses, restaurants, and services. The Drive is also home to many festivals and special events, such as annual car-free days, Italian days that pay tribute to the community's strong Italian roots, and impromptu celebrations during World Cup soccer tournaments. Today, Grandview-Woodland is home to 27,000 people. But what will this neighborhood look like in 5 years? In 10? In 20? How will transportation and growing development pressures shape the commercial and residential areas of the community?